Good evening, history buffs. John here, and I know there's something missing, right? The blazer. Folks, I cannot find the daggone blazer back here in my office. I don't know. My wife and we're going to have a chat after this video. I don't know if she's hidden it from me, thrown it away, or maybe I've misplaced it. I don't want to blame her outright until I know the truth. But rest assured, there's going to be a manhunt take place, son, right after right after this video. It's very upsetting. If I can't find it, I will get a different blazer, and it will be even cheesier looking. But it's got to be here somewhere. I don't know where it would have went unless I move some bags or something around. Thank you for being here, history buffs. I'm panicking here. Without my blazer, I just, it's weird. So tonight we're going to talk about the Alamo, and we're going to talk about what happened during the Battle of the Alamo in Texas, and also how it applies to 2021 with all of the nonsense that is going on in the United States right now, okay? So in 1836, the Battle of the Alamo takes place. It lasted, I think, roughly 2 weeks, 14 days. And this took place between the Mexican Republic under the command of Santa Anna and the Republic of Texas. And the command, it's kind of weird at the Alamo. The command, the ultimate, I guess the big chief, if you will, at the Alamo was William Travis. But Davy Crockett was also there. And a lot of troops, even though, they fell under the command of Travis, I mean, we're talking about Davy Crockett. They're going to do whatever the man says to do, right? He's a legend by this point. The troop strength going into the Alamo, Santa Anna had roughly 6,000 troops at his disposal, including 800 dragoons. So if you don't know what a dragoon is in this setting, these were heavily outfitted and armed cavalry troops. So, this was his best of the best, if you will. The troop strength for the Republic of Texas during the Alamo is roughly 260. And I say roughly because, folks, the numbers back then were all over the place. They didn't keep great records. They wrote down the really, really important stuff, and then the rest, it was kind of carried throughout storytelling. Somebody would say, well, there's roughly 300 people there, and that made it a couple of generations, and then somebody wrote down roughly 300. So there's no way to know absolutely for sure what the strengths were in terms of the troops and things and the casualties. But again, 800 dragoons, a total of 6,000 roughly Mexicans with the Mexican Republic. And again, 260 for the Republic of Texas. And some of those included, and we'll get into it, but they included Texas Rangers. I wanted to cover the Rangers separately, though. Casualties. So for the Republic of Texas, 257. So there were 3 or 4 survivors, grand total, from the Alamo. Over, on the Texas side. And 600 casualties for the Mexican Republic. So 2 for 1, basically. Each person at the Alamo that was dug in for Texas took with them to the grave 2 Mexican Republic soldiers. So they actually outfought Mexico, but I mean they were done in terms of numbers. Also worth mentioning is the Comanche. The Comanche were involved, during that time and in that area heavily, but they did not, that I'm aware of, they did not have anything to do with the actual Battle of the Alamo. Shortly thereafter, you get into the Comanche Wars and things like that, and that would be a great subject to cover as well. But the Battle of the Alamo, again, Texas versus Mexico, okay? So let's talk about Santa Anna. A lot of the history books that you're going to read on Santa Anna They're going to talk about how he was charismatic and, you know, he was very popular with the people of Mexico, which he was. He was very presidential, and he was very, he projected patriotism throughout his country. But he was a horrible general, in my opinion. You know, historians will look at this and they will say, look at all of the battles that Santa Anna had a huge advantage in, and he lost. He lost countless battles that he should have won, and then he would always make an excuse, and then he would pivot over to patriotism and he'd rile people back up. He was just that kind of a leader. So here's how the Battle of the Alamo goes down. Again, you have roughly 260 people for the Republic of Texas, and they realize they're pinned down. They ask for reinforcements. So at this time, they're asking the government, or the soon-to-be government of the Republic of Texas. People will often ask, do I think Texas could be its own country? Like if they were to secede from the Union today in 2021. The answer is yes. They've been their own country. They actually had 3 presidential terms. I don't remember the third one right off. I know it was Sam Houston, then there was somebody that succeeded him. I would have to dig around and find out. But there were 3 presidential terms before they officially became a part of the United States. So they were still getting the house in order. I mean, it was truly the Wild West in Texas. Texas was comprised of 2 different crowds, okay? One crowd was your outlaws, your people that just, maybe they were running from, you know, the law elsewhere. Maybe they were just card playing and whiskey drinking type of folks, you know, that skin a revolver off fast on you, son. And they just didn't put up with any nonsense. And this was all races of people. Okay, they didn't look at race at this point in the outlaw community. You were either with them or you were an enemy. The other group was people from the United States that had traveled to Texas. They basically sold off everything they had, and they were coming to Texas because the push was Texas, and then they were going to go out west towards California. So a lot of people had sold off everything. They had settled in Texas. They really didn't have anywhere else to go. They couldn't go back home where they came from because they didn't have anything left for them there. So they were Texans at this point. The government was forming. So the dispute was this, okay? Texas wanted its freedom, its independence. It wanted to be a republic. The Mexican government at this time, the republic, they didn't want to lose the land, okay? So this was why you see Santa Anna in combat. You know, again, very popular. They didn't want to lose. Texas is huge. He didn't want to lose this land. And then again, to mention the Comanche, they felt like it wasn't anybody else's land to lose. They felt like it's our land. Son, what are y'all fighting about? So the Comanche at this point during the Battle of the Alamo, they were more in preparation mode. They knew they were going to war with the eventual winner of the Texas dispute. It was just a matter of when. So that's the scenario that we have set up. The folks that are, again, under Travis's command with Davy Crockett at the Alamo, they realize, okay, we're getting ready to be surrounded here. We need to get a message or 2 out. They actually sent several messages out to the Republic of Texas. You know, send help. We need troops. We need supplies, etc. Because the Republic of Texas, where they were just forming, excuse me, they had approximately 320 soldiers grand total. Statewide, these were enlisted men. They only had roughly 320. And again, they had, I think, 22 Texas Rangers. Now, I want to mention the Texas Rangers for a second. okay? So they were not technically enlisted men, meaning military command could not force the Texas Rangers to move around anywhere. The Texas Rangers came and went as they wanted to. They were paid by the Texas government, but it wasn't a regular paycheck. And I think they had to provide their own horse and their own weapons and things like this. A lot of the Texas Rangers were either former frontiersmen or they were former military, you know. And so they were just like a band of, I hate to call them outlaws because they weren't outlaws, but they had the same mindset. You didn't mess with them, in other words. And 14, if I'm not mistaken, 14 were in the Alamo at the time the siege started, which left, 7 or 8. Again, the numbers are sporadic from this time period. So you had a group of 7 or 8 Texas Rangers that were at this point in time riding with the actual military of Texas. So number one, it's not like if they got the entire Texas Army to show up, it's not like it would have made a huge difference. Santa Anna probably still would have won the Battle of the Alamo. So what they did was Texas got these messages, these cries for help, if you will, by the people that were in the Alamo. And I'm going to use a 2021 term here, they forwarded this information to Andrew Jackson, who is the President of the United States. They're like, send help. Send help. It was, again, Texas was trying to become its own country, but it was kind of a foregone conclusion that eventually Texas was going to sign an agreement to enter the Union. So they were on really good terms with the United States at this point. Andrew Jackson does not send any help to the Alamo. And the reason he could have squashed this thing quickly, but the reason he didn't want to do it is the U.S. had a standing peace treaty with Mexico, and he did not want this thing to turn into a full-blown war with Mexico because, again, Santa Anna, very popular with his people. He could have rallied, it could have turned into a war cry. So instead what happens is nobody sends anything to the Alamo, and these 260 people now are trapped. They have munitions and things at the Alamo, but they have nothing compared to what Santa Anna was surrounding them with. So they get very creative. Okay, there's a reason that they outfought the Mexican Republic 2-1 here, okay? They start to chisel out holes in the wall of the Alamo, just small holes that they can stick a gun barrel through. They can barely see over the gun barrel, they're good to go. They have a few cannons here at the Alamo, but they don't have enough, munitions for the cannons. So what they decide to do instead is they're going to go around, they're going to get all the scrap metal they can find. Just broken metal, nails, things of this nature. They pack them in the cannons. This is actually what they use. And they fight literally to the last man. So again, they're under the control of Travis, but Davy Crockett had made his name by this point, and people really respected him. It is said, and I don't know if this is legend or absolute truth, but it is said once the Battle of the Alamo was considered over, and Santa Anna's men were raising the Mexican flag, that Davy Crockett actually killed 4 of them before they could get the flag raised. He did not want to lose Texas or the Alamo. So this is the kind of grit that those individuals had, which brings us to 2021, okay? So it's all about grit. I would compare Santa Anna, and I realize this is different time periods, okay? But I would compare Santa Anna, and his generals back in the day to much of the military leadership that we have with the Biden administration, okay? Santa Anna, for all of his patriotism, his cries of patriotism, and his popularity, again, number one, he was not a great military mind. And number two, he was very cocky. He thought, compare cannons, if you will, to F-15s for a second. He thought nobody can beat us. We have the cannons. We have more cannons than anybody else. We will line the cannons up and, throw huge troop strength, on top of them, and we'll just smother them. They don't have a chance, son. This was his thinking. This is Biden's general's thinking right now. This is the same mindset that I believe cost us the war in the Middle East. We're pulling people out of Afghanistan now. We were outsmarted in Afghanistan, and it's because of the generals that we have right now, surrounding Biden. You can blame it on Rumsfeld as well. I think he bears part of the blame. But at the end of the day, the generals that went in with the plans of just overwhelming Afghanistan in that area and just totally making them submit, they're to blame. And the reason is the same reason that Texas rose back up after the Alamo. You cannot take freedom away from people that want freedom. I mentioned earlier that the people in Texas, they had nowhere to go back to. They were cornered. Once you have someone cornered, they fight harder than the attacking force. Santa Anna's troops found this out. A lot of his soldiers did not want to be there. So even if they rushed in with superior numbers, the folks at the Alamo had nowhere to go. They had no home left. Texas was their only home. And so they fought fiercely. And that is the same thing that we found out again in the Middle East. We found this out in Vietnam. I would argue that for part of the Korean War, we found this out. Of course, the Koreans had help from China, but the thing is, the Alamo, the building itself, is not what is important about the Alamo. Okay, that's just a marking on a map. It's the thought process behind it. It's what the Alamo meant to these people. It was very symbolic. The Mexicans, they were not very nice. They did not quarter prisoners. They did not take and harbor prisoners. They would execute them after the battles were over. Santa Anna, again, he was very cocky. He said, well, I can just treat these people very poorly and get away with it because I have the cannons, I have the support of the Mexican people, I have a superior force. And what he failed to realize is when you take somebody that's cornered and you poke them with the stick for no other reason than to poke them with a stick, it really pisses people off. And so Texas, all throughout Texas now, people are getting pissed off. They hear what happened at the Alamo, and the brutality that was used against people that had surrendered at the Alamo. And this became a rallying cry. This became something that united people against a superior opponent. So Texas realizes at this point under, I think it was Sam Houston, they realize at this point, we're outnumbered. Yes, he has the cannons and all of this stuff. We're not going to fight him on a battlefield head-to-head, cannon to cannon. We're not going to win that way. That's what he's going to expect. We're not going to meet him out in the wide open, soldier to soldier, because that's his advantage. We're going to start doing it a different way. We're going to start ambushing supply lines because he has all of these soldiers. They got to eat. Let's hit the supply lines. They would hit convoys that were hauling cannons back and forth, and they would seize the cannons. For Texas, they actually used these cannons against them to eventually defeat Santa Anna. They would start downing bridges. There were a few instances where they would hit a convoy, like a supply convoy, and they would exercise the same brutality that Santa Anna had done, and then they would tie the bodies back to the wagons, and they would bring them in near Santa Anna's camp, and then they would just smack the horse on the butt. And so the soldiers had to watch their best friends coming back, you know, on horse and buggy, tied, you know, knives all through them and stuff. And it really depreciated the morale of the Santa Anna camp. His soldiers did not want to fight. They didn't have the stomach for that kind of a war. Really, it was guerrilla warfare before guerrilla warfare was cool. And so Texas then becomes, they defeat Santa Anna, they become their own republic, and the rest that they say is history. Then you start getting into the Comanche Wars. Santa Anna is eventually captured. He is taken to Washington, D.C., and he was forced into giving up the land of Texas in order to avoid a war. And then from Texas, we get into California. And thank you, Santa Anna. You, son, it's your fault that we have Hollyweird now. But anyway, folks, this is John with Prepper Nation History. I've got to find that blazer, my cigar jacket. It is here. I will try and keep y'all informed over on the other channel, okay? Take care and God bless.